The world's fourth largest lake shrank to less than 10% of its original size in just a few decades, and it didn't happen by accident. Soviet planners deliberately drained it to grow cotton in the desert. The result was one of the most extreme environmental collapses in modern history. But here's the twist. Parts of the sea are actually coming back. So how do you kill a lake this big? What breaks when you do? And can you really bring it back from the edge? The Aral Sea sat in Central Asia, split between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. For centuries, it was a massive inland body of water, fed by two great rivers flowing down from distant mountains. It wasn't an ocean, but it was big enough to create its own weather. Towns grew up around it. Fishing fleets worked its waters. The sea was the foundation of a regional economy, and people built their lives around the rhythm of the water. What made the Aral Sea special was not just its size. It was a moderately salty lake. Salty enough to be different from a freshwater system, but not so salty that nothing could live in it. That balance meant fish thrived. The sea supported a booming commercial fishing industry that employed thousands and fed entire communities. The sheer volume of water also acted as a thermal buffer. It absorbed heat in summer and released it slowly in winter, smoothing out the extremes and creating a milder, more stable climate across the surrounding land. The sea was a climate regulator, a food source, and a cultural anchor, all at once. Under the hood, the system was simple. Two rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, poured water into the sea. Evaporation pulled water out. As long as the inflow matched or exceeded the evaporation, the sea stayed full. The process was stable for thousands of years. The output was a massive, moderately salty lake that moderated the weather, supported ecosystems, and sustained human communities. Then the inputs changed. In the 1960s, Soviet central planners decided to turn the deserts of Central Asia into cotton fields. They built canals and diverted the two rivers that fed the Aral Sea. The water that used to flow into the lake now flowed into irrigation channels hundreds of miles away. The inflow dropped sharply. Evaporation didn't. The sea began to shrink. The process wasn't a mystery. It was physics. Less water coming in, same amount going out. The sea shrank year after year, and the planners knew it would happen. They chose cotton over the lake. By the early 2000s, the Aral Sea had lost about 90% of its volume. The shoreline retreated miles inland. Fishing trawlers that once worked the open water now sat rusted and stranded on dry salt flats, miles from any shore. The sea split into separate basins. The southern part, fed by the Amu Darya, continued to shrink and became hypersaline. The northern part, fed by the Sir Darya, shrank too, but held on a little better. The transformation was visible from space. Satellite images showed the water pulling back year after year, leaving behind a vast, pale expanse of exposed seabed. The fish were the first to go. The Aral Sea was once home to abundant fish populations. The water was moderately salty, and the ecosystem was rich. Commercial fishing brought in thousands of tons of fish every year. Canneries processed the catch. Towns thrived on the industry. But as the water shrank, the salinity skyrocketed. Here's why. Evaporation leaves salt behind. With less water to dilute it, the concentration climbed. The fish couldn't survive. The moderately salty environment that supported them turned into a hypersaline dead zone. The fish died off, the canneries shut down, the towns emptied. Today, in the southern basin, you can walk through abandoned fishing villages and see the rusted equipment sitting in the sand, miles from water. If you're following this breakdown and want to see more environmental collapses explained step by step, hit subscribe. We show you the mechanisms that drive these systems, and it helps us keep going. The northern basin tells a different story. After a dam was built in 2005 to trap river inflow, the water level rose, salinity dropped. Fish returned. Northern communities now pull in around 8,000 tons of fish a year. It's not what it was, but it's something. The mechanism here is straightforward. The dam stopped the northern basin from draining into the southern one. The Sir Darya kept pouring water in. The water stayed. The salt diluted. The ecosystem recovered enough to support fish again. It's a small win, but it proves the system can respond if you fix the inputs. The weather was next. The massive body of water acted as a climate regulator. It absorbed heat during the hot summer months and released it slowly during winter. This moderated temperature swings and kept the regional climate relatively stable. The sea created its own microclimate. When the water disappeared, the buffer disappeared with it. Summers became hotter and drier. Winters became longer and colder. Temperature swings became extreme. The growing season shortened. Dust storms became more frequent and more intense. Local farmers started reporting crop failures. Harvests that used to be reliable became unpredictable. The land around the sea had depended on the sea's presence, and now that presence was gone. Meteorological data confirmed the shift. The region's climate had destabilized, and the cause was clear. The exposed seabed became a new threat. For decades, farms upstream had used pesticides and fertilizers. Runoff carried those chemicals into the sea. They settled on the bottom. When the water receded, the seabed dried out. The wind picked up the salt and the chemicals and carried them away in massive dust storms. The dust traveled hundreds of miles. It settled on glaciers in distant mountains. It drifted over farmland. It filled the air that people breathed. The dried seabed created one of the world's youngest deserts, covering over 50,000 square kilometers. It's called the Aral Sea Desert. It's toxic. The dust contains salt, pesticides, and industrial residue. Local populations started showing elevated rates of respiratory illness and throat cancer, dozens of times higher than global averages. The sea had turned into a source of poison. There was also a strange consequence. As the water receded, an island that had been used as a secret Soviet biological weapons testing site became a peninsula. Возрождение Island was isolated when it was surrounded by water. When the water pulled back, it connected to the mainland. The site had been abandoned, but concerns remained about what might still be there. The shrinking sea had opened access to a place that was meant to stay cut off. Global warming is now an accelerator. Rising temperatures increase evaporation rates. Even with restoration efforts in the north, the system is fragile. If the climate continues to warm, evaporation will climb. The rivers will need to deliver even more water just to hold the line. The partial recovery in the north depends on continued cooperation, sustained river flow, and careful management. If any of those factors slip, the gains could reverse. The threat isn't hypothetical. It's built into the physics of the system. The cascade of consequences followed a brutal logic. First, the fishing economy vanished. Thousands of jobs disappeared. Communities that had lived off the sea for generations had nothing left. Then agriculture struggled. The destabilized climate made farming harder. Crop failures increased. Dust storms damaged fields. Then the health crisis arrived. Toxic dust from the exposed seabed started making people sick. Respiratory problems spiked. Cancer rates climbed. Each consequence fed into the next. The loss of the sea didn't just remove water. It removed stability. And that instability spread through every system that had depended on the lake. The human price is concrete. People lost their livelihoods. Entire towns were abandoned. Fishing families had to leave or find new work. Farmers faced harsher conditions and shorter growing seasons. Communities that had been stable for generations became fragile. The cultural identity tied to the sea eroded. The Aral Sea wasn't just an economic resource. It was part of the region's identity. It shaped how people lived, what they ate, and how they saw their home. When the sea shrank, that identity shrank with it. The northern recovery has brought some of that back. Fish are being caught again. Some families have returned. But the southern basin remains a wasteland. The recovery is partial, and it's fragile. The trajectory is conditional. If regional cooperation continues, if the rivers keep flowing, if climate change doesn't accelerate too quickly, the northern Aral Sea can stabilize or even grow a little more. The dam that was built in 2005 has already proven that targeted intervention can work. Water levels in the north have risen. Salinity has dropped. Fish populations have rebounded. The success is real, but it's limited. The southern basin is a different story. It continues to shrink. The rivers that once fed it are still diverted for cotton. The economy remains locked into water-intensive agriculture. Without major policy changes, the Southern Sea won't recover. The question isn't whether recovery is possible. The question is whether the political will and the resources exist to make it happen across the entire system. What should you track if you want to understand where this is going? First, watch satellite imagery of the shoreline. The northern basin has shown measurable growth since the dam was built. If that growth continues, it means the intervention is holding. If it stalls or reverses, it means something in the system has shifted. Second, track water salinity levels. Salinity is the key indicator for ecosystem health. If salinity stays low enough, fish can survive and reproduce. If it climbs again, the gains will collapse. Third, monitor air quality in the surrounding region. Dust storms from the Aral Sea desert are a direct measure of how much toxic seabed is still exposed. If air quality improves, it means vegetation is taking hold or the seabed is stabilizing. If it worsens, it means the desert is spreading. Fourth, follow water allocation policies. The rivers that feed the sea are still diverted for agriculture. Any change in how that water is managed will directly affect the sea's future. Fifth, watch for climate data. Rising temperatures and shifting precipitation patterns will determine how much water reaches the sea and how fast it evaporates. These 5 signals together give you a real-time picture of whether the system is stabilizing, recovering, or sliding back. The Aral Sea was sacrificed for desert cotton farming. Soviet planners chose immediate agricultural output over long-term ecological stability, and the result was the near-total collapse of the world's 4th largest lake. The fishing economy vanished. The climate destabilized. A toxic desert replaced open water. But the story isn't over. The northern basin has shown that recovery is possible. With targeted intervention, cooperation, and sustained effort, parts of the sea are coming back. Fish are being caught again. Communities are rebuilding. The recovery is partial and fragile, but it's real. The tragedy is that it was preventable. The hope is that the lessons learned can guide restoration efforts here and in other threatened water systems around the world. Thanks for watching. If this breakdown was useful, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Should we investigate a bleaching coral reef next, or a river choked by pollution? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you in the next case file.